Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by T.A. Forsberg and Wagoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So today's guest compares her work in community planning to road trips. A successful journey involves understanding the starting point, the destination, and how the route might be impacted by what we discover along the journey. Here to talk about her passion and her firm's work in this space is a partner from Detroit-based civil engineering firm Giffels Webster, Miss Jill Bahm. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely. So let's begin by discussing your brand. Tell us the story behind Giffels Webster. What services do you generally provide, and who tends to be your customers?
We've been in business since 1957, primarily starting as civil engineers, but then adding in land surveying, planning group, landscape architecture, geographic information systems too. And our clients, Giffels Webster, is split roughly half and half between private land development consulting and municipal consulting. So the planning team, which I'm in charge of, all of our work is with municipal clients.
Got it. Okay. And what kind of geography does your firm, handle? Do you go statewide? Do you go out of state?
We do. Planning team is all over the state. We do have some out-of-state clients as well, primarily our zoning work that we do. And then largely focused, though, our ongoing services that we do primarily in Southeast Michigan.
Got it. Okay. And you talk about planning, and so master planning for a municipality. So I was thrilled to be a part of this when I worked at Meridian Township in their economic development department, and I was a big front row center person in their master planning process. So I get it more than most, but I want to be really mindful that you and I don't go above everyone's head and talk about this. So talk about why a municipality creates a master plan. Is it required, and what is the intent behind creating a master plan?
It's a great question, and something that we try to be mindful of when we're engaging with our communities and engaging with people who don't necessarily know about what master planning is. The master plan is just a general, it's a good blueprint, a guide for how a community is going to develop or change, typically in a 10 to 15 year window. It is required by the state of Michigan if a community is going to have zoning rules. And zoning is how do we build what we build? What's the legal rules for that?
Right.
Setbacks and what's permitted where. We can't have those rules without having thought about the bigger picture first.
Right. Okay. So not putting the factory next to the chicken farm, next to the house, generally speaking, right? So having different places for different types of stuff to have a good community.
Right. And I would say that we might think about when we say, well, we don't want this use next to that use, be thinking about, well, why not? What is it about that use that we don't like? Is it noise? Is it odor? Is it traffic? Is there a way that we could mitigate that and have more things that are closer together that really serve the community?
Right. And it's also kind of a nod to being proactive, right?
Absolutely.
Because towns typically are trying to evolve, right? Some are trying to cling on to what they have and try to keep things in control and not have the area morph into something that they don't want, right? So it's trying to be more predictive and proactive and get themselves pointed in the right direction and kind of publicly declare the intent behind that, right?
Right, absolutely. And the more clear that a community can be about what its vision is, the more proactive they can be about trying to recruit that kind of business or that kind of development to their community, understanding that for the most part, most of the properties that we're talking about planning and zoning for are privately owned. And so recognizing that private property owners also have the right to develop their land, but we should be clear about what we want to see and what that looks like to us and how those things are connected throughout the community.
Right. And you talk about ordinances and zoning and things like that. So what kinds of, I know the answer to this, so I'm trying to tee you up for the general person, but how does the master plan kind of guide, say, a developer who has either purchased or is considering purchasing a property? Like, how can you legally kind of define what they can and can't build?
Right. That's a good question. So the master plan lays out what the community's goals and objectives are. It has implementation items which might direct certain changes in the rules for development, but it also includes a map. And that map will show general land use categories. So someone who owns some property, they might look to that first to see, well, what's the future vision this community has for this large piece of land or even this small piece of land. What's going to happen around this parcel? What's it connected to? And once they understand that, then looking at the zoning language, the rules for development to see, well, can I do that here? Are there changes that the community is trying to make that we can help them with?
Got it. So like the number of houses that can be put in a certain area, or how tall a building is allowed to be, like those kinds of things are part
Exactly.
of it. Okay. And so I got to believe that so you've got big cities like Detroit or Grand Rapids, and then you've got really small rural communities. And so I would imagine that when you and your team engage a municipality, because they all need to have a proactive lens on, we know where we are now and we're trying to get here. So let's put together a formal document that our residents and our government and our, and the people that want to come here understand very clearly what we're trying to do. So I guess the question is, how do you feel out your clients' wishes, right? So I would imagine if you had 7 city council people or a rural township board of directors or whatever, you might get 7 different stories as to what they individually want. But so how do you begin the process of figuring out what they want to do, and then how do you engage the community residents to try to get some agreement?
And that's all the important things, right? So starting off, we like to do visioning and we like to bring everybody together, all the electeds and officials, staff, to really hear from them. They're the leaders of the community, or they're the professional staff that are there, if it's a larger community or even a smaller one that has a good staff that's been there for a long time. And get a pulse from them. And what's usually interesting is, for the most part, when we do that kind of visioning at the beginning, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What do we see as opportunities coming down the road? And what are we nervous about? What are we trying to anticipate and mitigate against? That feedback we get early on is usually what we hear from the community as well. So that's a good cue for us. When we go and then start engaging with the community and asking people what they think, we don't normally hear radically different answers from the community. So that usually tells us that the elected leadership or the officials usually have a pretty good pulse on their communities. And that's good to hear, that people are in sync. What the officials know, though, is that there's more to the story than maybe saying, when we hear from residents, we don't like traffic. We don't want any more development. We don't want to change anymore. That those officials then, those leaders, really have to take a look at that and say, okay, well, not to say that we can't preserve what we have, but we have to change a little bit to preserve what we have. We have to change a little bit to do some of these things if we're concerned about it. Or we might say, financially speaking, we see some issues and we need to plan for that. We need to be strategic, though, in where we allow growth.
Right. Because they might have anecdotal stories of people keep coming with these kinds of developments, and we don't want them, or we do want them, but some of the parameters of what they're proposing don't fit with what we think we want, or we want them in a different place. We want them, but we want them over here, not over there, or whatever. So your services kind of help provide just kind of airing out of those and discovery of, well, why don't you want that? And let's walk that through. And have you considered these things? Not to change their mind, but to try to get them to understand maybe where there's a hidden opportunity or how they could guide it a different way.
Right. And the thing about community planners like we are, we kind of have a good idea about how everything is connected. So we understand, hey, we've noticed that this community, it's like a lot of our communities in Michigan and across the United States, we're getting older. How does this community respond to our older population? What are the things that the older population needs? They need housing, they need transportation, they need access to goods and services. So how are we going to prepare for that? There may be people in the community who've never thought of that before. And they think, well, they're going to live here, and then maybe they'll move someplace else. Maybe they'll go to Florida. Well, maybe they don't want to go to Florida. Maybe they'd like to stay here, going to the same places that they've gone, go to their place of worship, hang out with their friends, go to the same person that cuts their hair. And have that social network, which is so critically important. And so that's part of what we do, is just that education and then connecting the dots. I think.
And you also need to consider young people and trying to get them to stay and the jobs that they're interested in, trying to fold all that in together.
Right. And they need the same things that the older population need. They need housing that they can afford. They need access to a transportation network, and they need jobs, and they want things to do.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. You know, one group that's really good at this is my friends at the Forsberg Real Estate Company. When it comes to creating the best living and working environments for the community, no one does it better than my friends at the Forsberg Real Estate Company. Brent Forsberg and his team create vibrant, holistic communities that inspire growth and encourage belonging. Focused on building a stronger connection for people, a Forsberg project is always in tune with balancing relationships to create the optimum human experience. Since the 1950s, Forsberg has been enhancing the quality of lives in the communities they serve by following the principles of regenerative growth and aligning resources and tools available. Reach out to my friends at the Forsberg Real Estate Company by calling 517-349-9330 or check out their website at lansingrealestate.com. So you talked a little bit about community engagement, right? So hopefully the elected officials who are voted in by the community residents are aligned with what the people want. But I find that gets a little sticky, you know, that there can be a disconnect or you get the vocal minority. You know, I remember advocating for a development project at the municipality I was mentioning earlier on, and I was reminded by the city manager. He said, you know, this is a little contentious. You know, there are people that are going to speak up, and I was reasonably new to my role. And he said, but understand, he's like, if we could have 400 people stand up and each spend 3 minutes talking about why this is a bad idea, and you will have heard from 1% of the residents of our 40,000 person community. So don't let that throw you off. The people that are in support of this or, you know, aren't going to show up, the people that are against it. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. But that's a heck of a balancing act.
It is.
When you have a lot of people who say, no, I don't agree with this direction we're headed. How on earth do you advise elected officials in that way to not necessarily stay strong, but just to keep it in perspective? You need to hear these people talk,
That's the key. And I think using a variety of approaches to community engagement. So we know, you know, we may have a vocal, and it's likely a vocal minority in a place. They come to the meetings, they're organized, they speak at all the meetings. But that's a lot to ask for someone who's like, yeah, I support it. I don't know that I need to come to a meeting.
Right.
But trying to provide that opportunity for people, whether it's online, or through other electronic means, emails of support or surveying. So certainly through the master plan process, we try to provide a variety of approaches so that somebody has an opportunity in some way to provide their feedback.
Yep, understood. So the zoning, you know, how do you advise a municipality? Because there's a formal process to changing their zoning ordinance, right? So if they say in this district, we really want to have a cool new apartment complex with mixed use and all that kind of stuff, but our zoning doesn't allow it. So like, do you provide that type of technical expertise as to how to get them through the process?
Yes. And we start by looking at their master plan and we say, all right, well, let's look at the areas that you have targeted for change. And let's see what the master plan says about that. Does it talk about what your vision is? Does it talk about the building form? And often we're more descriptive in our master plans because we know that eventually we're going to have to write zoning language. We want to be as clear as possible in that other document, that master plan, to tee it up, set the foundation for it. Without that, we need to do a little bit more engagement. You've said you are interested in this mixed use area. What does that look like to you? What does it feel like? And then begin to build the zoning rules around that. And then testing it out too with property owners and developers. Does this work?
Right.
Does this seem to answer your questions? And really try to make things as clear as possible. One of the things that's really important to us when we're looking at updating zoning language or writing new codes is we want to make sure that it's very clear, that we're providing consistent terminology, consistent processes throughout the code, and that we're able to achieve the vision that the community is looking for.
Right. And I know that the MEDC has that Redevelopment Ready Communities program that they're trying to get municipalities to follow certain best practices. But the thought behind that isn't we want you to think this way. It's more of call your shot and make it easy to find.
Right.
You know, in this world of the internet, which is now obviously old. But back in the day, you'd go in and talk to the city planner, or you talk to someone and say, I want to build this here. Is that cool? Or where's your code of ordinances so I can see whether it's allowed? But I think the idea behind that is it's a best practice to have everything be discoverable, right? Not only the master plan, but then the way to go find the ordinance, right? To make sure it's like, well, you say you want this, and then here's the ordinance that actually more clearly defines you can have this guy's residential density, or you've got to have this kind of setback you mentioned as to how the building form might need to look, or this is, we're willing to have you go tall, but it can only be this tall, right? Those kinds of things. So you advise on that kind of work as well, right?
And we work with the MEDC and the Redevelopment Ready Communities program. We've been fans of that since it's been back in that form, 2012, 2013. We worked with MEDC to help them develop best practices of the 6, 2 and 3. Zoning is number 2 and development review process is number 3. And then trained with them around the state of Michigan in 2013 and 14, which is one of my favorite things to do is the training. I like explaining how this all works because it's important stuff.
Right.
But with respect to the zoning, you're right. Having it be easy to find the information that people want so that the city planner or the staff person in the community doesn't have to just be on the phone answering basic questions all the time, that they can go to their code, they can send people online, or they can have a PC or a display at their counter. Anybody should be able to find answers to basic questions. In fact, anybody in that municipal hall should be able to find the answers to basic questions. They should be able to explain to someone what the review process is like. I want to build a building. What do I have to do? Well, let's see. Let's go to this part of the code, and it looks like you qualify for this kind of a review, and it's going to take you this step, and here's what you need to provide, and here's what the process is.
Right. That's so helpful. So now, if I'm not mistaken, Giffels Webster has its proprietary intellectual property on Clearzoning, the brand Clearzoning. So talk a little bit about Clearzoning. What is it and why is it important?
Well, Clearzoning was born in 2008 just for those kinds of reasons, to make zoning codes easier to get through, to navigate, to understand, to see pictures that illustrate the words that are in the text. If you've been on a municipal website and seen codes, it's just ongoing text, lines and lines of words that
legalese,
right. And so how could we transform that into something that's just more user-friendly, that people can navigate? And I was just talking to one of our Clearzoning clients this morning, and she was saying how much she loves it.
Oh, nice.
How much she loved it before she got it, and she's got it, and now she's like, I still love it. Just to be able to navigate. So it's got a real logical organization to it, and then hyperlinks throughout. It's nothing overly complex, and it's usable on a PDF reader. So
is that, do you fold in the existing code of ordinances into the Clearzoning platform? And that gives you, what's the benefit? You said you have the hot links and all that kind of stuff. Does it also have like diagrams?
It has all color pictures, graphics.
Nice. Okay.
That illustrate the words, because sometimes we have two people that understand words and we have people that understand pictures, and we like to have both so that we are making sure that we're hitting everybody with understanding. And if we can add a graphic to explain text, then we like to do that. But that helps people just get a good, clear picture of what is allowed in the community.
Wow. Okay. So that seems pretty revolutionary. Is that, so when you engage with a municipality, it's got to be one of your recommendations, not only because, you've invented it and you probably charge a fee for it, but it's also, it gives a nod to the whole concept of being transparent and making it really easy. Because again, a developer might say, I'm interested in a 30-acre parcel in a couple of these communities. And so, hey, person in my firm, go troll a couple of these municipalities' websites and see whether we can do what we want to do there. And if it's either hard to discover, or they just obviously if they discover they aren't allowed to do it because the community doesn't have the appetite for that. But if it's hard to navigate and someone else's is easier to navigate, without even knowing it, you might be turning off a development project that really satisfies your master plan.
Exactly.
And then part of that is having the standards in place that are easy to follow and easy to understand. Trying not to have too many standards that say, the Planning Commission could waive these rules. Well, waive them for what? And why would they waive them? And how does the Planning Commission know that they can waive them?
Right.
And so even when we allow those things, because we like to offer that kind of flexibility with the code, but giving people a clear reason, like, well, we might waive it for these reasons, and be very specific. Maybe it's historic properties. We recognize they're harder to develop. Maybe it's to achieve other goals. Maybe it's to achieve a housing goal that we have, because we've got a crisis of housing, not only here in Michigan, but across the country as well. Maybe we could trade off some of our rules for that flexibility and to get what the community is looking for.
Got it. Okay. So that would be kind of more clearly defined, almost like use by rights. If you fit into this box, you don't have to go through this big approval process.
Right.
If you need variances or things that are kind of out of the scope of what we're defining.
Yeah.
So
and it doesn't,
speed to build, really.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean that we give away all of the things that are important to us, but we say, you can do this use if you do all these things, and then you're good.
That's fantastic. And talking about housing, I mean, we all need a place to call home. And Chris Silker of Keller Williams Advantage and Team offers the expertise that you're looking for. He has helped clients navigate the complicated world of real estate in mid-Michigan for over 10 years, providing the best information possible at the right time to empower the best decisions. Whether you're a first-time home buyer looking for a local expert to guide you from point A to point B, if you're searching for an income property in the competitive Lansing market, right-sizing your life, or just searching for your dream home, Chris Silker and the Advantage and Team is the name to trust in Greater Lansing real estate. Visit advantageandteam.kw.com or call Chris Silker at 517-242-9251 today to find the home of your dreams. So your message to the listeners, if your particular department tends to work with municipalities, right? And so who do you tend to engage with at the municipality? Clearly, you talk to kind of everyone in this part of the world, but when you're really shoulder to shoulder, hunched over a document, I mean, who tends to play these roles?
It tends to be the city planner or the community development department. Sometimes it's the city administration, city manager.
Okay.
But those would tend to be the front runners, planning commission chairperson, maybe if it's a smaller community.
Got it. And a lot of those folks are appointed or employees, right? So, but the elected officials clearly want to get in there and express their opinions, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. But the staffers are the ones that kind of get this to the finish line.
We help support them in the work that they do. And so whether that's through our long-range planning assistance, through a master plan or the zoning work, or if it's day-to-day services, reviewing plans, or just helping people navigate through their particular system, we're there to support them.
So you might have mentioned this earlier, but how often is a municipality kind of expected, or what is the best practice as to how often they dust it off and refresh it? Because certainly things change, whether it's pandemic or demographics of their constituents or the age of their people or,
So the legislation that we have in Michigan that allows us to do planning and zoning, the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, requires communities to look at their master plans. Just review them every 5 years. What does that mean? That means to look for those changes, right? Like look at what's happening with our demographics, what's happening with development in our community. Did we have development that we didn't expect from 5 years ago when we wrote this plan? Or have we seen nothing happen? Is there something happening in our neighboring communities that's going to impact us? Are there other trends? COVID was a great example of something that changed dramatically, that if we look in plans from before times, they look different than what they might look like today. So how do we anticipate what comes next? How do we plan for that? And so that 5-year period is just a good point to check in. Hopefully, communities have been implementing and looking at that plan on a yearly basis to check items off of their implementation list for that document, so that 5 years hasn't gone by and they haven't looked at it. But that gives them a good chance to just take a look and then decide, do we need to change anything? And they may say, no, everything looks good. We're just going to reaffirm this plan and we're good to go. And then communities can look at it even in a shorter period if something like that changes, one of those changes come up. We've been talking with a community who has some development proposed, and they're not really sure what to do with it, and they want to take a look at this as a study area in their master plan again.
Makes a lot of sense. So remind our listeners how they can get in touch with you to learn more, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in here that are interested in how their community works.
That's great. Yeah. We're at giffelswebster.com as our website. They can find us there. There's contact information. We're happy to just have a conversation with folks. We've had people call and not necessarily sure what they're asking for, but just explaining what's going on in their community, and we can kind of help point people in the right direction. Maybe they need training. Maybe they need other kinds of assistance, and we are happy to help set people on a course and walk them through that, however that works for them.
And if you're a person listening saying, I don't know anything about my community's master plan and how that all works, how would you advise them to kind of research that?
That's great. And I would really encourage people to do that. So go online, go to your municipality's website and look for your master plan document.
Right.
Hopefully it's there. If it's not, look for the planning department or community development department and find out when was our plan adopted? What does it say? How can I get a copy of it?
Right.
And take a look through it. Hopefully that will be interesting information for people to understand really how the built environment shapes how we live and work and move about our communities.
And how there's a proactive strategy.
Right.
Right. And
Exactly.
And I have found that if you're doing that type of homework on the place that you live, people are usually pretty responsive. So if you want to send an email to the city planner or
absolutely.
economic development director or whoever you might find, when is our new master plan expected to happen? I'd love to be part of one of these community, forums or a think tank or whatever. I think that it's a nice civic engagement because nothing's more frustrating than for being a resident and knowing that there were opportunities to submit your opinions or whatever and not having done that. But from the other side of that, it's also frustrating to be 97% of the way through a year-long process and have someone come out of the woodwork. I had no idea this was even happening, and I disagree with all of it. It's like it's kind of hard to walk that back. So, well, it's been a fantastic conversation. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to share with our audience?
I can't think of anything else, but definitely get engaged with your communities, find out what's going on, and be part of that. It's important for your community and important for all voices to be heard.
I couldn't agree more. It's such an important thing that most people don't even know is happening. So it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with the partner from Detroit-based civil engineering firm, Giffels Webster, Jill Bahm. Thanks for joining me, Jill. I hope to bring you back and maybe give me a follow-up on some other facet of the Giffels Webster's offerings.
I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'd like to give a final shout out to all of my loyal sponsors, the Forsberg Real Estate Company, Wagoner Financial, Triterra Environmental, Good Marketing, Keller Williams Advantage and Team, Michigan Rise, and the attorneys at Foster Swift. All of these folks are fantastic people doing great work. And also, if you found the show as a one-off, I invite you to subscribe to Michigan Reimagined on YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere you find your podcasts. This is Chris Buck signing off from Michigan Reimagined.